Music has been an important part of American history for many years. It was used as a method of boosting confidence on the battlefields while inspiring soldiers during the hopeless times in war. It helped to keep them organized and helped spread peace. Music played a key role on the battlefield, but it also gave families at home some peace of mind. The Civil War was the bloodiest war in U.S. history. It was a war that left many with little hope and much despair. Diseases were widespread and entire cities were destroyed from battles. Not only were white soldiers a part of the war, but African American soldiers played a huge role as well. This war was fought between the North and the South. The South believed in enforcing slavery while the North was looking to abolish it. The North became known as the Union and the South became known as the Confederacy. With limited technology and resources for the time, music was used to alert soldiers and also to keep a steady beat, which they walked in line to. During the Civil War, one of the soldiers' favorite ways to pass time was through singing. They had songs for every emotion, happy ones to keep their spirits high, and sad songs for when they were thinking about home or about loved ones. Spiritual hymns, which were sung by African Americans, were passed on through oral tradition and were prevalent during this time period.
Both sides in the Civil War wrote songs about experiences along their journey as soldiers. Frank H. Norton, a soldier from the Union, wrote,
"In the army of the Union we are marching in the van, and we'll do the work before us if the bravest soldiers can. We will drive the rebel forces from their strongholds to the sea, and we'll live and die together in the army of the free."
James Pierpont, a Confederate soldier, wrote,
"The trumpet is sounding from mountain to shore, your swords and your lances must slumber no more. Fling forth to the sunlight your banner on high, inscribed with the watchword, we conquer or die."
Drummer boys were boys as young as even 7 who were an important part of the battles fought during the Civil War. They helped with communication and order in the field. They had different drumming calls, from telling the army to retreat to congregating the officers together. Aside from their serious obligations, the good drummer boys would often entertain the men in times of rest or wait.
After the Civil War, there was a great deal of progression, reconstruction, and technological innovation for the United States. It was this that would help them prepare for the war to end all wars, World War I. World War I was an excruciatingly painful war for the soldiers fighting in it. The method of combat was known as trench warfare. The trenches that they were forced to live in order to avoid being victims of open fire attacks were dismal, cold, disease-infested, and traumatic. Many of the soldiers that returned from the war faced a condition called post-traumatic stress disorder, a disorder that very few understood, and it was very life-changing. In many ways, music was used to spread as much joy as possible for the soldiers and for their families left at home. It brought hope, and in a sense distracted them from the horrors that were being witnessed by their loved ones overseas. Propaganda was a big part of World War I, and using music for propaganda was very effective. Music greatly affected the moods, feelings, and ideas of Americans. Other artists such as Louis Armstrong helped make jazz more and more popular during this time period. Unfortunately, the war to end all wars unexpectedly turned out to be a false title. In 1939, World War II broke out after 2 decades of an economic boom and the greatest economic bust America has ever seen. World War II was a global military conflict lasting from 1939 to 1945, which involved most of the world's nations. It was fought in Europe and in the Pacific. The cause of the war in Europe was a totalitarian dictator named Adolf Hitler and his followers, the Nazi soldiers. They wanted to create one master race of blondes and blue-eyes. The war in the Pacific began after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on the Hawaiian island of Oahu. America invaded Japan and dropped the world's first atomic bomb in the huge civilian cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. After the war, the Allies created the United Nations in an effort to maintain peace.
As the major powers entered the war, millions of citizens had home radio devices that did not exist in the First World War. American troops had access to radios very often. Music helped to connect soldiers to a more sane life back home. and helped to keep their morale up during the darkest of times.
One very popular song during the war was "Coming In on a Wing and a Prayer" by Anne Shelton.
What a show, what a fight. Boys, we really hit our target for tonight. How we sing as we limp through the air. Look below, there's our field over there. With our one motor gone, we can still carry on, coming in on a wing and a prayer.
Back home in America, the 40s was a huge time for swing music, big bands, and social dancing. Socializing and dancing was a primary way for people on the home front to forget about the fear of the war just for that night.
Almost 2 decades later, Vietnam was split into two, the North under a communist government and the South under a democracy. The U.S. entered the war after being attacked by the North Vietnamese torpedo boats. When Nixon became president of the United States, his plan to end involvement in Vietnam was to build up the South Vietnamese army so they could fight on their own. This process was called Vietnamization, and once it began, American troops started returning home. During the Vietnam era, many people were against the war, including many musicians who wrote songs that were completely anti-war. An anti-war song served as a rallying cry and a cause for action. One of the most famous songs during this time is "Unknown Soldier" by The Doors. Breakfast where the news is read, television children fed, unborn living, living dead. Bullet strikes the helmet's head, and it's all over for the unknown soldier. It's all over for the unknown soldier. John Lennon, who was best known for being a member of the world-famous rock band, The Beatles, left a legacy as an iconic figure for not only creating some of the most popular songs in history, but setting the stage for a new era of peace. He and his wife, Yoko Ono, were very active protesters of the Vietnam War. They created a media buzz when they held a Bed In for Peace, in which they stayed in bed for 2 weeks, letting the press in for a certain time frame each day. They would follow up by recording "Give Peace a Chance." This song would go on to be an international anthem for spreading peace. The war in Afghanistan began as a war on terrorism after the attacks on 9/11. America entered with the main goal of dismantling Al-Qaeda and removing the Taliban regime from power. The war in Iraq began when an American-led coalition invaded Iraq and overthrew the Hussein government, which had been a brutal dictatorship. The goal now is for American troops to somehow rebuild the Iraqi government.
In recent years, music has especially been used as a method for personal expression of opinion. Artists write lyrics that are mostly anti-war. The famous song, "Where Is the Love" by the Black Eyed Peas promotes peace rather than war.
A war is going on, but the reason's undercover. The truth is kept secret. It's swept under the rug. If you never know truth, then you never know love.
Another famous song called "One Day" by Modest Yahoo expresses the wish for peace one day. All my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say that we don't want to fight no more. There'll be no more wars, and our children will play one day. Famous artists who do not even usually sing about peace have begun to incorporate the war into their music. In this famous song known as "Words I Never Said" by Lupe Fiasco, he starts his song by explaining how ridiculous the war seems to him. He says, "I really think the war on terror is a bunch of bull, just a poor excuse for you to use up all your bullets."
Throughout many years and many wars in America's history, music has helped create a sense of hope and joy in unbearable times. It can keep order among soldiers, pass time while they wait, and keep spirits high. Although music is often overlooked when it comes to a war, it has proven to be a very important aspect.